love, light, or any of the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and self-control. Where have you seen those things at work in your life in the last 30 days? Oh, share. Oh, we could just do it that way. You want to just do it that way? There's not much. Okay, tell me. Then you don't have to share with the person next to you. I'll repeat, just like last week. Where have you seen God at work, Diana? With your physical therapist. Yep. I did not. Am I giving them my phone number? Who's got a phone on them? I don't have my phone on me. 908-310-7423. 7423. 310-7423. Operators are standing by. So if you have a question or you have thoughts, please. We're glad that you're with us, not in person. And last week we had a lot of people watch during the week, so that's really good. All right, thank you. So Diana says with her physical therapist, she sees God at work. Where else? Where do we see God at work in our life in the last 30 days? In a family relationship. Yep. I had someone text me today saying, I think 2023 is a miracle year because of a family relationship. So where is God at work? Yeah.
I do a lot of volunteer work now, so just start that.
Yeah. Yep. So volunteering and being with other people and just having a really good day with others. Yep. Where do we see God at work in our lives? Yeah, so a really rough day, not a good circumstances, but not only was God with Lynn, but Lynn had the thought to bring God into it throughout it. Remember that God's with her. Where else have we seen God at work in our lives in the last 30 days? Yeah. Okay. Right. So patience, having patience that saw itself to justice. Yeah, I say God's there. Mm-hmm.
Son who lives in Pennsylvania. Well, it's trying to remember
The name of the town. But you had a visit from your middle son.
Yes, it takes him about 3.5 hours.
Okay, so it's a hike for him to come, so that's a blessing, absolutely.
And he brought his wife who barely lives at one, so we don't really know her very well. Yeah. And our grandmother.
Right? Okay, so the son came with a fairly new wife, got to meet her a little bit more, and your grandson.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So feeling love in our lives makes us feel God with us. Where have we seen God? Yeah, at Early Birds, it is an interesting thing that we have one person, the leadership is rotated, and so every week someone shares something different from what they've been reading or thinking, and it's often like spot on for many others on the call, and so you can see that God is working with others in our lives, through others in our life. Lori. Yeah. Right? A lot of us aren't willing to ask for help, but we get help, right? Especially from our church family. I think people we're more bold in each other's lives to just say, I'm just going to show up with something. Interesting. So it's both, you saw God at work in their lives, but now you see God at work in working on you to ask for help. Yeah.
In bringing those cookbooks up,
yeah,
we realized that those boxes were everywhere.
Yeah.
And we called Jean, why not?
Uh-huh.
And he just immediately came and
Moved the boxes for you.
moved the box really carried.
Yeah. So if you weren't at worship and you didn't hear, the Fergusons are donating a bunch of cookbooks, and they also realized when they were donating them that they couldn't lift the boxes. And so I love that they asked for help. Jean came right over to do it, which I'll have to say, I mean, we've said it many times, it's other people in our life that often is the work and action of God. Anything else? So here's where I understand the main issue to bring us from last week. The main issue that will determine a church's viability is whether or not it can engage the culture through the ability to contextualize and make meaningful the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is a really long sentence of essentially what you just did, right? You put God into a context, which is your life and what happens in your daily human life. And you gave meaning to that the gospel of Jesus, which is love and light and liberation, right? That you see those things at work in our lives. That's contextualizing the meaning of the gospel of Jesus, right? So even if you put it out to a sermon on Sunday, I'm still looking to contextualize the meaning of the gospel, right? Otherwise, I would just tell the story, and we would never talk about what it means to us or how it might change us or affect us. But churches, the vitality of churches is hinging on our ability to contextualize the meaning of the gospel now in our lives, and then that means in the life wherever we go. When we go to the store, when we go at home, when we're on the phone, when we're, having bad situations or good situations or sick or with our neighbors. So context. We covered this last week in large, but here's like the summary. We're in a post-Christian world. Sometimes we call it post-Christendom. There was a time, and I think a lot of us can remember this, when our context was primarily Christian in the West. Churches were filled with folks who lived near the church and chose Christian community life. It was kind of a regular thing that people did. Maybe not everybody, but it was kind of normal. Seemed like it was normal. And all churches had to do when that was normal was to remain relevant and or attractive. All they had to do was to curate a good Sunday service, because it was assumed that people will come to Sunday service. So as long as it's attractive and meaningful and contextualized in this building from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock on Sunday, churches could remain vital. Now what? So I want to talk about how we can respond at Clover Hill Reformed Church. And so first, I just want us to look at who we are and what we are. And this comes right from our mission study report, which you all have, and we have more copies. Our mission statement says, at Clover Hill Reformed Church, we seek to create spiritual friendship, to serve our community, to gather for Christian worship. So creating spiritual friendship. In the classic work, Spiritual Friendship, the 12th century Cistercian monk, I can't pronounce his name, is careful to say that what makes a friendship spiritual is not its lofty height so much as its origin and direction. Spiritual friendship begins in God, continues in God, and is perfected in God. So spiritual friendship is a road, and we are on this road together. So it's friendship that starts with, we have this thing, God, together. Spiritual friendship. That's true of us. Our second is to serve our community, right? We live in a specific place and time where both our internal church community and our external neighborhood community have needs, right? Lori even said, I had COVID, people took care of me. We have needs. We want to live our faith in tangible ways that meet expressed needs, providing support in the midst of struggle. We want to promote or have, to create spiritual friendships and to serve our community. That's what we want to do. And then the third thing is to gather for Christian worship. We engage in the rich tradition of our Reformed worship, celebrating through quality music, praying with one another, and listening for God's thoughts to us in today's world. That's the third thing we do together, right? Create spiritual friendship, serve our community, gather for Christian worship. The other thing we're doing is calling a part-time or a bivocational pastor. And the search team has spent a lot of time talking about and reading about what are some of the parameters of that. And me being here, I feel like is actually an experiment, because we're learning where those parameters actually are, right? And so I just want to talk briefly about it. Particularly Patty and Marilyn, if you have something that you kind of want to add, Gary, if you have something from the search perspective, reading a part-time pastor. I think I'll share while you think, just a couple things that I know that I've learned, because this is the first time I'm trying to be a pastor part-time. I actually consider myself more bivocational than part-time pastor, which maybe it's just semantics, but it might help you, because whatever pastor you have will have carved out a full life for themselves. And there is something else after they're working with Clover Hill, right? But my vocation is as a pastor. And part of how I spend my week as a pastor is as the leader of Clover Hill Reformed Church. But my vocation, my full vocation, is pastor. That's one thing I definitely have learned while I've been here. The second thing is the thing that I run out of time for every week, more often than not, is writing my sermon. And that probably was always true for like the last 25 years, but there was more time in the week. And so it didn't really run out. You just could steal it from something else, but then there was nothing left to steal it from. So, third thing, and then I'll stop. The third thing that I definitely think is true of Clover Hill, and Lynn and I have used thousands of words to talk about this, that you have figured out as a community of faith how to have teams that are empowered to do the work of the church, so that the pastor doesn't have to be involved in a lot of that stuff. Sometimes, but not all the time. And that it will work without the pastor a lot of the time. And that frees me up to write a sermon. But the things that knock me off is I try to meet with several people a week just to see how you're doing and how can I pray for you and talk about what we're learning and growing, what's the irritants in your life these days. So those things and a sermon are what I want my life here at Clover Hill to spend most of the time, most of my 24 hours. I want to be that and not the other stuff. You guys want to add anything to that? We get afraid, I'm just going to repeat, we get afraid when you say part-time, people get afraid because I guess they think the pastor's like doing errands the rest of the time. Right. Yeah. So thinking about the words and not confusing what they can mean. Here's the other honest truth is, for the size of Clover Hill's congregation, we do not need a person who works 40 hours a week. There wouldn't be, well, pastor can always find something to do, right? We can always find things to fill our lives, right? Exactly, most likely. They're right. If they're not retired, then they're if they're not retired or part of a family where they don't have to work full time, then that pastor will figure out intentionally what else they can do for another part of their salary. But what you're saying is we're getting the resources we need. We've figured, just like we've figured out how the teams work, we've figured out what resources we need as a pastor for this size church, right? I mean, I think in another conversation we could talk about, like, if we decided, like, if we came into a bunch of money and we decided that we should also have a full-time pastor, because that's still a big if, we would have to figure out, what do we want that pastor to do with the rest of that time? Yeah.
That was my question. And I think we've had part-time pastors or interim. Okay, and they'll always say things like, all right. And I think a lot of us will think part-time. We're thinking of a job that we all have done in our time.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, maybe you put in so many hours, you stock a shelf, you
Right.
do a certain job, you go home.
You clock in, clock out. Thank you. Especially since I'm pretty sure I'm a girl and I'm standing right here.
What would they, responsibilities?
Yeah.
How much? Would it be, would you be making it into, okay, so it's so much time for the,
Yeah.
okay, but it's very good, but then so much time to visit,
Uh-huh.
people in the hospital,
Yep.
or who are shut in,
Mhm.
or help out with, teams as far as
Yep.
responsibilities of the team,
Mhm.
and so forth. I don't know if that's what you're putting into your,
Yep. Profile.
profile, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think there's that mindset, like,
Uh-huh.
the difference between a part-time intern and a part-time job.
Right.
But it's not necessarily going to be a part-time minister is going to be here for 40 hours a week either. It's part-time. It's not, there's not enough for them to do 40 hours, 50, 60 hours a week.
I'm going to start passing this around, sorry, and then I'll
And
catch
it
you up.
might not even be the same hours every day. It's not gonna be like an 8 to 12
This is not gonna
job. The hours will be sporadic, too, right?
But we also have to utilize what we have here already.
Yeah.
We have the team. We have the people that can do the work that the pastor is not mindless work, certainly not, but it takes up time.
Yeah. All right, let me recap and then I'll get back. So we don't want confuse. I love how Barry was saying, we've all kind of had those part-time jobs at some point in our life where we think we go in, we like clock in, we clock out, and it's not necessarily a job where we're giving of our heart and our whatever. So I want to introduce, which is kind of the word that we're using now, the gig economy, right? I know that might be foreign to many of you who are already retired from a good career at one job. That doesn't exist anymore right? I'm 52. Doesn't exist anymore. So in the gig economy, people have multiple jobs that together make up a career or a vocation, right? So if a pastor is, I'm a shepherd of God's people, part of the time I do that as the pastor of Clover Hill Reformed Church. And part of the time I do that as a coach for the classes of Delaware Raritan. And so so I've figured out how I can be a pastor for all of my time. Instead, you might get a pastor who says, you know what, I'm gonna work at Starbucks because it's easy, I don't have to think about it, and then when I'm done, I can be the pastor at Clover Hill. It depends on who the pastor is and how they want to rearrange their life. But I think you're right, us thinking about, and to answer your question, yes, the church profile will be pretty clear at what that looks like. And then even in the interviews, they'll talk about what are the things you need a pastor to do. How do you think your week might shake out? I think those are all good questions. And I can give like an idea of how I do it. So we have an idea. Gary.
Okay, it's some of the words in here, bivocational, or part-time, actually, it's sort of combined each other. I think our successful candidate, is going to be someone who's bivocational, that does know their skill set. How to measure time now.
Yeah.
So both sides of the vocation are really equal benefit to the candidate.
Yeah.
Challenge for a congregation is to understand the difference between part-time bivocational and that they can solve for. Bivocational, maybe it is.
Could be one, or it could be two or three. Yep.
And the candidate that we want best to know how to balance it out.
Yep.
Blocking time is short. And I would think personally, let's say 24 hours, talk about here. Sometimes 24, sometimes 26.
Yep. Yeah. So the pastors. Yeah, I think I think that we're uncovering that part-time is a little maybe not the best option, but I think you're right that the pastor will have to figure out how this works best for them and how to juggle. And you're absolutely right that some weeks there's 26 hours and other weeks there's 22. More often than not, there's some weeks there's 30 and then other weeks there's 15, right? So, I don't know how it works, the math, but most pastors, that's actually a pretty normal pastoral life. So if you're full-time, and you guys know this from your careers, what your jobs, some weeks you just work a lot more, and then you gotta make it up for yourself. What you want is a pastor who can juggle and figure out what was the word you used? Organize their time really well. But you also really want a pastor that does not overfunction or overwork, right? Because you want a pastor that is rested, right? That is relaxed when they talk to you, because you need a pastor to be a pastor. But you got tons of friends and tons of colleagues and whatever. You only got one pastor, so you want your pastor to take very good care of him or herself. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So that we're satisfied as a church and that the pastor is also satisfied. We want a candidate that's success. Someone. Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. Mhm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk right now. I would imagine that's true.
Understanding of the person that rents multiple apartments happens to be a nurse. That person is a nurse in the hospital. They're not going to be available to us every second of the day. Right. We need to recognize that they are bivocational. They may have another job where they can handle that. And that's why we have also a relationship with Three Bridges and mechanics. And sometimes it's just hard to say, we have to turn it over to somebody else. That pastor can't do it. They're going to work out some kind of relationship. It's like your on-call dentist, your on-call doctor. You don't get to see your dentist because that's an emergency. You see the dentist.
You see someone. Yeah.
You see the doctor on call.
Right.
And I think we're going to have to adjust ourselves to understanding the same thing is going to happen here. You can't always see that person, but there will be something there.
Well, that's a good thing. That's something that's not been discussed before. Have that relationship.
Yeah.
We always have a relationship with the local church, especially the chat. And if you got that, portfolio, like, okay, here's our backup.
Yeah.
Basically, that's something that can develop.
And that
Yep.
will happen because we can't expect that to department.
Hold on.
But they can drop everything that they're doing.
Right.
If they work full time.
They might not be able to drop everything. Okay, so let me recap this part of the conversation. This is lively and wonderful. I hope it's okay for everyone else. So we need to have expectations that are appropriate. And we also need to recognize kind of what Barry said is that we've, over time in our life, have assumed a certain relationship that we have with the pastor and how that works out. And that might not work out. And so some of the things that we'll talk about here was what Marilyn said. We already have a relationship where the three churches are covering for each other. But I will say this just in, we're in the process of starting a new team this year that's going to be called, so far, the Pastoral Care Team. And so in every church that I've worked at, which have been full-time, I have still had this team because I think it's actually really important for people in the church to respond to people in the church, right? So on the off chance that there is really an emergency, the pastor is a nurse, can't get out of work, there will be lay people who are trained to do something right now and text the pastor and say, heads up, this is what's happening, call me when you get off your shift, right? So we're getting ready to even be able to adjust or to respond to that in a really helpful way. You were going to say something.
We had a request from online people that they
All right.
can't hear.
All right, so if you talk from now on, now we have two, that's fantastic. Okay, go ahead.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going
You're
to
gonna say
say
the pastoral
the
care team.
pastoral care team.
Okay, yeah.
Like,
What a good consistory member you are. Pastoral Care Team, coming right up. Nancy Lane is going to head that. She's coming on consistory again. What other thoughts about? Sorry, online people, that was a lot of talking. So a lot of conversation, which is good. All right, so we looked at our mission statement. We realized we're intentionally going to a part-time pastor. And now I want to talk about 3 ways that people today, churches today, are responding to what's happening in the church, right? The first is that they're intentionally building relationships with their neighbors, with their coworkers, with their friends, and they're listening to who God puts in their life on purpose. And so I want you to stop where you are, and I want you to write down names of 8 people you interact with regularly who are not churchgoers. Good luck. 8 people. Start with 4. Start with 4. Some of you it'll be easier, some not, right? Depends. 8 people that are not churchgoers that you interact with regularly. I did, but then I went back. 8. They thought I changed it to 4. 8 people that you interact with. 4 to 8 people that you interact with that are not churchgoers. No one else will have to see this list. This is your list. You and God are writing a list of 8 people you interact with that are not churchgoers. Or 4. Could be the butcher, you guys. The landscaper, people, yeah, there are people we don't realize. Okay. They could. So if you don't know they go to church, they don't go to your church. So 8 people. You don't know. Some of them, we might not know if they go to church. So if you don't know, go ahead. I'm looking for people that you have a little bit of in with. That if you didn't rush to your next thing, you might stop and ask, how are you? They're okay. Oh, because Jim's okay. All right. That's good. It's 5. It's not an easy list. So while you're finishing up, many folks at the classes met with the the head of kind of church development. We don't call it that anymore, though. So, and he was the one who challenged all of us to write down 8 names. And if you think it's hard for like all of us, it's really hard for pastors too, because we spend our time with you. Like most of our time is spent with people in church. So we started writing down these names, and we just said a prayer. We said a prayer over these 8 people, or I had 4 to start. And I asked God, help me to have good, loving conversations with them. Help me to be a source of light in their life. Surprise me on how I might be kind to them. Surprise me that they might share something about their life that I could then dare to say, can I ask my friends to pray for you? Right? So then this person, Chad, directed us to this book called Surprise the World, which is a tiny little, it's almost like a pamphlet book. It's 5 habits of highly missional people. So this is in response to, remember we talked about when Christendom was here, all we had to do was have a good show on Sunday, and people came, and that was what made a vital church. That's no longer the case. And so this is one of the ways the church has decided to still be salt and light in the world, with the understanding that building a big thing on Sunday isn't how God's doing it anymore. So here's the 5 habits. They bless 3 people each week, and 1 cannot be in your church community. Now, to bless someone means I'm going to give you a text and say, hey, I'm thinking about you, how you're doing. Blessing could be showing up with flowers. Blessing could be, I made a really good soup last night. Can I share it with you? Right? Like just being part of someone's life. A blessing could be, I remembered your birthday. Happy birthday. So just being, inserting yourself into someone's life, being a blessing. 3 people. Eat with 3 people each week. Also, one of them cannot be in your church community. A little harder, but it stretches us to share our table with each other. Primarily, Jesus ate with people, which leads us to the that's the fourth. The third is listen for the Holy Spirit's direction. So as you're getting to know these 4 to 8 people, as you're blessing these people or eating with these people, listen for how the Holy Spirit's working. That's why we started with, how have you seen God at work in your life this week? So listen for how God is working in your life with these intentional steps to build relationships. The fourth is learn about Jesus. Go back to the Gospels and look at what Jesus actually did and said. Forget our dogma that we've created out of the entire Gospel, out of the whole canon of the Bible. Focus on what Jesus did and said. Learn how Jesus walked among people. How did he talk to people? What kind of questions did he ask people? Learn about Jesus. And then the last is journal, or write these things down, maybe at the end of the day, maybe over dinner. What did you see happening? Did I have good conversations this week? Where did they happen? What happened? Why? What made it a good conversation, right? Did I try to reach out to someone and it didn't really work, which I'll tell you, the 4 people, mine haven't ended up the same people. Like my first thought was like, oh, these are the people that I'm tending to have good relationship. I'm building a relationship with, but then it's not that I'm still building a relationship with all of them, but I've noticed that, oh, wait a minute, this week I had a conversation with this person. Let's put them on the list, right? Oh, this person, I'll still keep them, but it doesn't seem like that's where I'm going, right? So I'm going to give you my one example. I did this last week. I had one example that I wished I didn't give, and so let me pause. Okay. You know, I'm a dog park person, right? I have really good conversations with people at the dog park. Like really good, meaningful conversations, not like, how's your dog doing, right? But really like, what are you doing this week? And then they say, I have a really big presentation and I'm doing it with this coworker and I don't really like the coworker, and it's astonishing, right? So I started to pay attention to those conversations. Now, they know that I'm a pastor, and so maybe that's a little different. Not always, because not for nothing, like for a very long time in my career, I never told people I was a pastor. If I was on a plane, no way. No way, because I will either for the next 30 minutes hear why they don't go to church, which I don't care, right? Or what the worst thing that's happening in their life for the next hour, right? So I would say I'm a writer. So now, as I've grown into it, I can say I'm a pastor. So just because I'm a pastor doesn't mean people ask me good things. Sometimes it means I'm stuck in those conversations. That's not true. So there was one day I put someone on my list, and I thought, I don't want it to be weird, God. I don't want it to be that now I'm like evangelizing my friend who I really love his dog, you know, right? The next day, we're just talking about work, whatever is going on, whatever. And then I thought, because I was a little nervous, I guess, or embarrassed, I was going to change the subject to something else, like dog food. And this person instead asked, hey, what's your sermon about this week? I said, well, I'm reading this thing, then I'm thinking about this thing, and then I got to ask him a question about his life. What do you think? Do you ever think about this? Do you think about this? People actually want to talk about their spiritual lives. Somewhere along the road, we were told they don't. Somewhere along the road, we were told that people are offended by us bringing up the fact that we have an encounter with love and light every week. It's not true. It's not true. People are dying for stories of love and light. They're dying for them because they live in a place that's dark and without love. They want to hear the stories. So, 4 to 8 people. 3 blesses, 3 meals, listen to the Holy Spirit, learn about Jesus, pay attention, write it down. That's one way the world is responding. The second way, which is often very true and helpful for people who are millennials and maybe the ones above them, so like 20-somethings, maybe early 30s, is to focus on mission activity. So what would Clover Hill Reformed Church look like if we became less inward focused, which means caring about maintaining our structure, worship, and then our teams and things that keep our church alive, and more outward focused. So what would we need to change? What could stay the same? How would this affect our finances? Or how would it affect our Sunday worship? Do you understand? Do you have any thoughts? I know I threw most questions, but we learned last week there's a bunch of like churches popping up that are mission-based, justice-based activities, right? So they spend all of their energy on this outward focus and very little energy on the inward focus. Were you going to say something? Okay. Were you going to say something? Okay, you're just nodding and helping me. You're being supportive. Can you think of how it might change us or what we might have to think about? If we chose to be more mission active. We'd have to find missions that we really care about, and then, which Barbara leads this team of service. And so when we do have mission activities, it's from their team, right? We'd have to start giving more airtime for the service team. Yeah. We'd have to take our missions elsewhere. So Patty has walked around her neighborhood and said, we're collecting hats and gloves and scarves and socks. And now people come to her door. And so if Patty was the perfect Christian right now, she'd also have apple pie to give them. But do you, I mean, I know I did that tongue in cheek, but there's a part of me that's like, that's a fantastic way to, like, you revealed a huge bit of you to your neighbors, right? And she revealed a huge bit of us to her neighbors by doing that. Jenny, what were you going to say? Yep. Yep, churches left the building in the fall, did some wonderful things, unexpected things. There was great blessings that we gave to people's lives. It was wonderful. We focused. How different was that? We had to focus a lot of attention, right? I mean, when we first thought about it, we're like, whoa, this is a big ask, and will we really be able to do it? But we did. But we also had to not focus on other things for a little bit so we could focus on this one big outreach and being outward focused. Any other thoughts about what it would be if we decided we would focus more on mission, outward than inward? Could be out of country, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of need.
There's a lot of need, yeah. And so I think, I listen, I have a group of people I wife and we do talk about it. And it's, but I think trying to get, I think people are out to that point where they understand more and want to help out. Whether it's just a leg up, it doesn't have to be always one area.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where you're absolutely right. We all feel that there is some serious need in the world. It feels overwhelming, and how much can I actually do, my one person? And church people tend to do a lot, right? We tend to actually be pretty busy. If we were to flip and do some of our put more of our energy toward really thinking about the needs in the community and calling that our worship, instead of when we come to church, it means this hour on Sunday. Not all the time. I'm just saying, what if we put more emphasis on it than what we do now? How would that change? Because there's still a similar conversation as the part-time bivocational pastor. There's only so many hours the pastor's going to have. There's only so many hours y'all are going to have. If we choose to be just this, not to be a 10 o'clock Sunday, and that's what we're primarily going to focus on, we're going to be primarily inward focused. There is a shelf life for that, right? We are vital right now. It will not last forever. It will not last forever. So these are things people are doing to see what happens when this thing that we have doesn't last anymore. They're building relationships and they're focusing on mission. And then the third thing, which is harder to talk about, but it's reasonable to say, and other churches are choosing this, is being a legacy church. So a legacy is something that's passed on from a predecessor or the past. And a legacy church is any church that gives away its resources for something else to grow in its stead, right? So there are some churches that choose, they got to a certain point in their lifespan where they realized, you know what, I don't think I want to wait until there's only 5 of us left and we have to let the classes sell everything. We're going to decide before we get to that place to sell the buildings, right? To find our resources, and then we're going to invest those resources in something. It could be, some churches have invested it like wholesale in a mission that was very important to them, so that it endows something that's been important. Some churches put it in a fund that can be used for other churches to plant. Some churches put it in specifically where youth things are happening with young people, so that we can invest in the next generation of kids and children in the church. Hard, I realize that's a really hard word. It's kind of reasonable though, right? If we think about ourselves as a family, right? We would have to be having these conversations. Like if we were a family of 45, let me put it on a classes level so you understand. We're a family of 26 churches. 9 of them worship 50 people or more. Everyone else worships less than 50 people. 11 of them are in active transition. You're one of them. Active transition, doesn't have a pastor right now, so figuring out what to do. 1 of them closed this last year. Probably 2 will close this next year. Because there's only 13 or 8 people. But they've gotten to a place where they don't have any energy for anything. There's no chance to look at mission, right? They went too far and didn't do anything ahead of time to say, where do we want our legacy to be? There's one church looking at how to like revamp their whole building to be affordable housing, right? So there's other things you can do other than sell. The First Reformed Church in New Brunswick, that's what they did. They worship in like a little chapel that they had, and then the rest of the building, they created affordable housing in New Brunswick. So legacy can be all kinds of things. So you have been here, most of you, for a long time in this church. What would you say you wanted the legacy of Clover Hill to be? Or what would you say others would say they want the legacy of Clover Hill to be if you don't want it to be you? What would the legacy of Clover Hill be?
That's a really tough one, because for most of us, like I'm sitting going, I don't want to like church. Like I don't think that what we have to be, but we've been like the Lord said, the light's still shine here. We're still pretty strong. And I think our legacy would be still continue to help others.
That's different than worshiping on Sundays, though. That's different than, is that different than having the church like we have it now? 10 o'clock on Sunday, all of our resources go to building and a part-time pastor.
But I don't think all our resources do that. There's a lot of our resources that go out to our mission.
There's,
Our community, more or less, maybe not a big number, but even if it's a one-on-one with a neighbor.
we're absolutely sure.
Really, you need to have, to me, I think you still need to build. All right? You need to
We
have
got stuck there
that
last week, too. Right.
And I did see last week.
It's hard. It's totally hard to figure. It's hard. I'm all with you on the building. Can I tell you that the hardest thing I said last week, and I feel like I've tried to say it in a lot of ways, but then I said this one sentence and it was so clear. And I don't know if any of you else heard it, but I said, we were talking about what's on the flea market table, And someone said, well, the full-time pastor is on the table. And I said in response, and I didn't say it snarky, I meant it, I said it like just blah. I just said, we actually sold that already for the building. Right, like, so it is going to be rare in the next 15 years for me to find a full-time pastorate. And churches have decided that buildings were more important. That's hard.
You still need to have a focal point, whether it be instruction.
Sure, I mean, we're going to have a place to gather, sure.
Right, and to have folks to have a meeting.
Yep.
And that kind of thing, so, we've been here a long time.
Mhm.
I grew up at the Shannon Church.
Mhm.
I've seen where they went through,
Mhm.
okay? And, there's tough times, demographics change every 10 to 15 years. When we ran youth group, we had an issue where we had a lot of kids, where we had to split. Now we have we don't have youth.
Right.
But then again, who knows 10 years from now? And we had the same thing with our Sunday school. But it's like, I still think we need to have a focal point of the building, and as far as we're still doing that. And if we can help others, that are struggling, I think that's where we are in the congregation.
But it's the question, if you get to the point where we have to sell, what would the one that close
Like Jerry said, I don't want to think about that.
I know.
Can so remember last week, and I'm gonna wrap us up. Just because it's 11:40, not because I don't want to talk. Barry, I totally appreciate what you're saying. Remember last week in the middle of our conversation, we said, let's talk about how grief feels and how it sounds. All of what Barry's saying is grief, right? We're grieving what used to be and what is not so far, and we can't see forward. Although I will tell you, it's kind of what I do. I mean, this is for real.
Don't you think we have to look forward, though?
I am looking forward.
We need our history,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
To see where we
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
We have our pressure. But we got to continue to look forward. It's like things aren't always bad.
They're not. That's why I'm saying today was a forward-looking conversation. Today was me saying, if you want to continue relationship building, focus on mission activity, or if you do not want to continue, you need to start talking about legacy. If you want to continue, this is across the board. Lynn got an ugly text the next day, said, I can't believe I saw that. Doom and gloom. I love this. Doom and gloom, right? Doom and gloom. Let's get rid of the pews and have a bonfire. And I said, you got to want to know that sentence, right? Like, because we talked about bonfire church and we talked about pews, but we didn't talk about bonfire with pews. So I get that this is so painful. The church raised me too. The church raised me too. It doesn't exist the same way it did. But that doesn't mean God's still at work, right? So remember from last week, there's not a single church that Paul planted that is alive today. Not a single church. The Apostle Paul was not a failure. The church is still alive. Jesus Christ is still king, right? The kingdom of heaven has still come near. All of those things are true. And those churches, the iterations of church, never last. They're not supposed to last forever.
That one thing that you struggle with is all
I got another one. I got two.
one of the things I think we struggle with as a congregation is to come up to that decision-making point. And what I'm talking about that is, we're a church, we're struggling like a lot of churches. You mentioned how many churches are going under and what other churches are doing. Question out there with no way to answer today is, do we want to invest our time as a congregation allowing our church to be open to help these other churches who are failing, or are we going to spend our energies saying, okay, we're going to be a legacy? And that's a yes or no question. I think Barry's on the same line here.
Yeah.
It's like, am I selling my house or not?
Yeah.
And why? I think my suggestion is we work on how can we use our church, our skills to open this church up so others can fall into this, a place for them to come to if they need to, versus saying, okay, close that door, we're going to do something else. That's a tough decision.
We still have
reality of what happens if, okay? We're now looking for a part-time pastor, okay? So that means that we have shrunk, okay? If we don't want to continue shrinking, then we have to do X, Y, and Z. But we still have to look at the inevitable if the inevitable happens to happen, and that is, what do you see for the future of this church, this building, and this community if we don't have a large enough community to support the church? So what type of legacy would you see if this all took place? So, I mean, it's not to say that's going to happen, but you have to look towards the future, and that could be in our future.
Yeah.
And then we have to choose as a community which direction we want to go in.
Yeah.
And if we're not able to build the community up and build the number of people that are supporting this church, then we have to look at the reality that maybe we become a legacy.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so, hold on. Say again.
I feel like if we're thinking about
Here's a-
legacy,
Go ahead.
I feel like if we're thinking about legacy, then that is the direction we're going and that we've chosen. So if we choose, as Jared said, to open ourselves up to other missions and other churches and utilize what we have to bring people in and to bring people together, that is kind of the direction that we've chosen. I don't mean don't have a will, don't have a plan
Right.
in the back of your mind, but if we focus on that legacy and everyone gets that in their mindset, then we're dead in the water, so to speak.
Right.
So if the focus is on that mission and that outreach, that revitalizes everyone. That brings new life and breathes new sense into what are we going to do to fill that mission purpose?
Yeah.
What are you as the individual who's coming
Right.
to bring us together? How are you going to help to serve this purpose that's in front of us? So I feel torn. Again, I think everybody should have a will, but on the forward moving portion of it, I think you have to figure out how to move forward and how to make it work.
Right.
And maybe it is finding someone who maybe is bivocational or not bivocational, as you said, maybe someone who is in that position that they don't have to pick up that job at the start. Maybe it isn't. Maybe that will be the candidate. The solution isn't the candidate. The solution is how we move forward in accomplishing our goal and accomplishing our mission. I don't know. I feel like a little bit of a tweak in that mindset takes all.
I totally get why I mentioned Legacy Church and you all wigged out. It's not a surprise. Not a surprise. Not a surprise. I'm not saying, please hear me say that. I'm not saying that's what we should be doing. Although I would say, my prayer for you is that you do not have 5 people who end up closing the doors and turning off the lights without doing something better with your stuff. Because you have a lot of stuff, and that would be tragic. Do you hear me? That would be tragic. So, okay, but we're not there yet, but I get that you're wigging out. Yeah.
So that we end up hearing each other clear one.
Yeah.
And I am getting clear sense. Each one working. But I love your visual of the game. And we held it up here. We said, this is where the church is right now. This is what we're doing. Then you took your other, and we put it underneath, and kind of wiggled the fingers up. And we said, we start trying things that will filter up. And you didn't say the word filter, but they start filtering up into what the church is, and it starts to change it.
Right.
And so we as a core here love coming to worship on Sunday morning. And right now, and that, as we have those things filtering up, that may start to change also. One of the things
I don't have
that
it.
I love about this Clover church, all the many years I've been here, is that
We have to wrap up online, sorry. Go ahead.
we have never been afraid to try. never. And then if something didn't work,
It's okay.
we
Didn't-
tried that and let it go.
Right.
So the legacy that I would see down the road at some point, whatever that would be, is they would look back and they would say, they tried before they found that they needed to go to the door. If we ever even get to that, that's what we're talking about.
Okay, Bob has to go online, but if something really different is said, we'll let you know. Sorry, and Lori is now speaking. We have yes, we have a congregational meeting next week, and we'll be in person downstairs, and so we'll finish up this conversation. I'll give a wrap up before. Thanks. Thank you. Blessings.